Welcome back to the class, and following the previous two sessions discussions on uh, functionalism and conflict theory, we are discussing interactionist perspective today. So I mentioned in the previous class that I'm spending three sessions or three classes in order to introduce you to the later developments of sociology. And interactionism is one of the important schools of thought, extremely influential schools of thought that emerged by 1930s, 1940s onwards, and by 70s and 80s, it became one of the very influential schools, especially so in the US more than in the UK. And this, unlike the conflict theory and structural functionalism, looks at society rather differently. The methodological orientations are different. The 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 way in which it understands society is different. The way in which it understands human beings is different. So it's a very interesting theory, and you are already familiar with it because we spent a lot of time on discussing G.H. Mead, and Mead is the founder of one of the, we can call him as the founder of interactions perspective, because most of the subsequent scholars have been heavily indebted to the arguments of G.H. Mead and others. So it focuses on this micro social setting, and why that we are saying that this interactions perspective focuses on micro social settings, because unlike a conflict theory, or unlike a structural functionalism, which talk about macro sociological processes, large historical changes. You just imagine the theorization of Emile Durkheim or Max Weber or even Karl Marx or Auguste Comte. They were all talking about meta theories, isn't it? They were all talking about theories that span the entire human history, theories that can be applied anywhere, or even Talcott Parsons for that matter. Parsonian functionalism is a grand theory. So in the place of such grand theory, not only the grand theory, but the way the domain of their theorization, it was the kind of a macro scenario. In contrast to such theorizations, interactionist scholars really focused on the micro social settings. They focused on the whole question of interaction. They tried to make sense of this whole process of interaction. They wanted to understand what are the dynamics of this interaction, what is the chemistry of this interaction, what are the processes involved in interaction. When hundreds or thousands or millions of people come together, and if they share the similar culture, or even if they don't share the similar culture, how is that there is a kind of a normalcy is made possible? How is that there is a kind of an equilibrium is made possible? Okay? And what are the processes through which they understand the same thing? How is that somebody is made comprehensible to the other? How is that somebody is made intelligible to the other? And how this intelligibility is shared, created, shared, and then strengthened and sustained among different people? How do people come with a kind of shared sense of identity, shared sense of purpose, shared sense of ideas, shared sense of the social, shared sense of the social existence? These are some of the extremely important questions. And it was the centrality of interaction and human beings as meaning-making agents who construct society actively. So this is the most important element, and this is in sharp contrast to people like Durkheim, who did not give so much of an agency or empowerment or leeway for individuals to create society. Rather, Durkheim looked at human beings as some kind of a prisoners of society, people who are forced to behave, act in ways that are determined by society. I hope you remember our discussion on social facts. It talks about its coercive capacity. And in that place, in complete opposition to a typical Durkheimian understanding of society, here interactionists would argue that human beings are meaning-making agents. They don't simply behave. They don't simply behave on the basis of certain stimulus. They behave, of course there could be, they would react to stimulus, but more complicated processes take place in their mind. And even more complicated processes take place when they are combined together or when they share their space with others. And they actively construct society. It's not that they are forced into society and then they lead a very limited life. They actively create society. And that is one of the most important or decisive theoretical orientation of interactionist theories. A host of them. There are a number of people advocating different positions, but they all share this idea that the focus must be on to understand how there is a shared shared subjective understanding is created about the society. And of course it was influenced by Max Weber. I hope you remember. Max Weber was one of the most important sociologists who provided an anti-positivist turn or an anti-positivist twist to the methodological and epistemological debates within sociology. He brought in Westerhen. He argued that human beings simply do not behave, but rather they act. His theorization on action, his typologies of action, his arguments about objectively understanding the subjective meanings attached by the actors on their action. These were extremely influential for these scholars whom we consider as people belong to interactionist school. Then George Simmel we discussed, C.H. Cooley, a person who came up with this very interesting argument about looking glass self-theory. You just like a mirror that you look at and then look at your own image, you look at the general public, you look at your immediate significant other, and then you derive your image about you. And then John Dewey we discussed, and G.H. Mead we discussed in detail. Mead's argument about mind, self and society. Mead's argument about this I and me of the self. Mead's argument about the development of the mind and the self. And most importantly, Mead's argument about the centrality of social interaction, centrality of society in creating a healthy mind and self in every individual. And his argument that a constant reciprocation between the generalized other is what constitutes the society. So these were extremely important founding fathers of interactionist perspective, and their significance is extremely important. And another important scholar, Herbert Blumer, an American sociologist who was a student of G.H. Mead and who taught in University of Chicago. He is yet another important scholar who focused more on this symbolic aspect of this communication, symbolic aspect of interaction. Mead spoke about the significant symbols, the important symbols, especially that of language, and Blumer advances that argument. Blumer develops on that argument and then brings in the whole dimension of the use of symbols, and how do the symbols play important role, and how do we collectively use symbols in order to reciprocate, in order to understand, and he plays an extremely important role. He played a very important role. And then you have Erving Goffman, who coined this term dramaturgical approach, and it almost says as what Shakespeare says, all the world is a stage and everybody is an actor. So in a sense, Goffman would suggest that you and me or everybody, we are acting on a stage. Our everyday life is nothing but acting. It sounds weird, but if you think from a different perspective, it is true. We could be acting very sincerely, isn't it? Even in the most sincere of the moments, in front of your parents, in front of your loved ones, in front of your close friends, you might be the most sincere person, but still you are acting. We can't help but acting, and this acting is done when we adopt certain specific roles. when we know that what is expected at a particular time is different from what is expected in front of some other group. So Goffman argued that our everyday experience, everyday existence is a set of dramaturgical processes. We interact with each other as if we are playing a drama. We are performing in front of an audience. We are performing on a stage. And he uses this very interesting term called as this front stage and backstage. And front stage is what we put up in front of others, what we want others to see in us. This is what we project in front of others, including your verbal, non-verbal, bodily aspects, how others want us to be seen. And this includes your dress, the way you dress up, the kind of things that you use, the appearance that you make, the kind of tone, tenor, the kind of gestures that you think, and the kind of voices, the modulation, and of course the intention. And here he would argue that we are very consciously performing very discrete roles at different times. As a student, as a lover, as a teacher, as a citizen, as a consumer, we are extremely adept in changing from one role to the other. And that is mainly possible because we are performing. That is the front stage in our everyday life. All our gender, our religion, our profession, all these things are on display. Okay? And we know how to make ourselves visible. We know how to present ourselves in a variety of ways. And he talks about the backstage, where we are the more, the real self, where we don't have to pretend, where we could be completely different from the people whom as we project. It could be completely different us. It could be people with all kind of weird thinking. It could be people with all kind of very perverted kind of thinking, or it could be people who are completely different from what they present. So he says that his argument, Goffman's argument, is that human interaction is a never-ending process of this acting between this front stage and the backstage, and that really brought in interesting dimension, interesting discussion into this whole argument about how we discuss with each other, how we create a sense of intelligibility, and how we live our everyday life. And all these theorization, including dramaturgical approach and others, they all owe to a much larger philosophical foundation of phenomenology by Edmund Husserl, very important philosopher. And phenomenology is all about the whole cost of meaning making. It does not believe that there is already a meaningful society exists out there and you only go and need to get that meaning. It doesn't believe that. It doesn't believe that there is already a social reality constructed out there for you to go and then capture it, unlike what Durkheim would argue. There are no social facts as already ready-made stuff out there. Phenomenologists would argue that human beings constantly engage in the process of meaning creation. They create a world in which everybody who participates equally understands the contours, equally understands the grammar of that particular world and of that particular context, and only then society is possible. So how do people constitute their subjective world of meaning? How do I read a situation? And how is my reading of a situation, it has to be similar to that of the reading of a situation of the other? And how do they make it intelligible to others? How do I communicate? How do I express, or how a group of people share, how everybody is on the same plane? That could be another way of putting it. How is an intersubjectivity is created so that effective communication is possible? How is that an intersubjectivity is created, that everybody who is at the same time, they are on the same plane? Just think about a ritual in a temple, or ritual in a house, or a death ceremony, or a birth ceremony, or some housewarming, or any other kind of ritual. And that ritual has a particular context. And everybody who comes to participate in that, they are on the same plane. They understand what is to be done, what to say, what not to say, how to behave, how not to behave, and that they are able to communicate with that. They are able to they are able to be on the same plane. And how is that possible? They actively create that, because there's no hard and fast rule about how you should behave. But socially conditioned forms, socially conditioned ways of behavior tell us that these are the gestures that you are supposed to demonstrate. These are the words that you're supposed to use. These are the actions that we are supposed to enact. And that really create this particular kind of context in which a kind of an intersubjectivity is possible. You think of a classroom where 50 or 60 students are sitting, and the teacher comes in, teacher walks in, and that particular moment creates, shapes that the space for an academic exchange. Everybody is on the same plane. They know what is supposed to go on. Or in a temple or in a church, when a priest gives the sermon, it is perfectly clear what is expected and what is not expected. So starting from this such kind of very context-specific incidents or context-specific episodes, phenomenology tries to understand how larger processes of meaning making is possible. And Alfred Schutz, another sociologist, again American, he elaborated on this concept, and then he concentrated on this everyday life and stock knowledge. He concentrated on the everyday life of an ordinary person, and how does one negotiate this everydayness of his life or her life, and the importance of a stock knowledge. Stock knowledge maybe can be roughly translated into the common sense that we discussed in the very first week. In that class we discussed how sociological thinking must be different from common sense. But people like Schutz would say that this commonsensical thinking, it constitutes the stock knowledge, the enormous amount of knowledge that we carry in our head that facilitates our everyday interaction. The knowledge about food, the knowledge about etiquettes, the knowledge about manners, the knowledge about the role of others, the role of us, the rules and regulations. And in the absence of these huge amount of knowledge, it is extremely difficult for us to behave naturally. And that is why we are absolutely comfortable in our own cultural context, because that is we are extremely habituated with that. That is our place. Whereas if you are put into another context, another location, another place, among a set of strange people whose customs, regulations, food habits, you are not familiar with any of them, and then you really recognize how difficult it is to live. Even you become so embarrassed, you become so bewildered. Your action becomes extremely conscious, isn't it? You don't know what to do. You don't know whether what you do would be seen as correct or wrong. And if a person is continuously put into such kind of a situation, it becomes extremely difficult for that person to survive, because you need to be in that sense of relaxed, your own homely atmosphere. Why we say that when we go back to a home, we feel more relaxed, because home is the most intimate place where your stock knowledge is at the highest form. It's the most intimate place, or your close friends with whom you share all kinds of secrets. They represent your innermost close group, your primary group. And another sociologist is Harold Garfinkel, again American sociologist, who coined this term ethnomethodology and conducted a lot of experiments, breaching experiments. Interesting argument. So Garfinkel focused on the question of ethnomethodology can be seen as understood as the methods of the ethnos. Ethnos means human. What are the usual ways in which human beings conduct themselves? Okay? What are the strategies and what are the mechanisms through which they conduct their everyday life? And he he conducted a series of breaching experiments. Breaching experiments in the sense he would conduct experiments that would deliberately break the routine of a particular social context. For example, he conducted an experiment in a classroom where instead of going and then teaching, the professor entered into the class and then he did some weird thing. For example, he distributed papers on the floor and then he started collecting it back and then arranging it properly. He started adjusting the windows, and that left students to completely different kind of answers. And when the students were interviewed, you got completely different kind of responses because they couldn't make sense of what was going on. So Garfinkel would argue that we have all adopted certain kind of methods to live a kind of a normal life in the society. One of the usual examples that I often give to the class is that when somebody asks you, how are you? We say that I'm fine, or we ask the same question back, how are you? And sometimes we say that you are fine. But on one occasion, when somebody asks you, how are you? You stop that person and then ask him, what exactly really you want to know about me? Do you really want to know about my personal life, personal well-being, or financial well-being, or social well-being? What exactly you want to know about me? As an answer to this question, how are you? And you are sure that the other person who just asked in a very casual manner, how are you, would be really surprised, isn't it? He would be really bewildered because he would have asked you, how are you, just as a gesture of acknowledging your presence, or establishing that, okay, you are familiar faces, or to say hi. Instead of saying hi, he would ask you, how are you? And you say, I'm fine. When you say I'm fine, it doesn't convey anything. You don't say that I'm not fine. Nobody says that. Even if you are really not fine, you don't say that you are fine. Okay. So when you breach that agreement, that when somebody asks you, how are you, you say I'm fine, and you ask, how are you? So both of you know that the other person knows the answer. The other person knows that this is only a gesture, and the how are you question doesn't have any content. It's only a hollow question. Okay. So but we don't pretend it to be like that. We don't pretend it to be like that. We pretend as if we are serious about it, and once you get this answer that I'm fine, you walk away. Okay. So he conducted a series of such kind of experiments, and you will find a host of similar experiments in the YouTube, in a host of websites. Especially people conduct a lot of social experiments, try to understand the attitude of people towards race, caste, religion, gender, and where they bring in a certain kind of unexpected twist to this whole episode, where people's usual surrounding, usual situation is very deliberately breached, very deliberately subverted. That brings in quite a lot of unexpected kind of results and scenario. Okay, so these are some of the important scholars. Again, I have given only a very sketchy account. It's not a very detailed account at any manner. And as I told you, my intention is only to flag the kind of a direction in which social theory or sociological theory developed after 1940s. And these three schools are conventionally taught in Indian universities as well as universities abroad as three major theoretical orientations: the structural functionalism, conflict theory, and interactionism. And of course, there are so many subdivisions within that. There are so many theorists who had differences of opinion among themselves, but these orientations are more or less clear. There are three broad categories. And after that, let me end this session by just introducing a couple of more later developments of theories, which again, not in order, not an exhaustive list, because it's impossible to list out the major theoretical arguments. So you will see feminist theory becoming very popular after 1960s, extremely popular after 1960s, and by 70s and 80s, feminist theory assuming serious significance. And feminist theory is nothing but its sociological theory. And we know that the question of gender, the question of women were hardly addressed by most of the major classical sociologists. But later, this women question came back to the center stage, and now no sociological theory can really develop without addressing the question of gender. And when I'm saying gender, it's not only women, it's about masculinity studies, it's about gender studies, queer studies, that whole sexuality studies. So it's really, there has been an explosion of gender related or identity related theories in the post 80s. And then you have this rational choice theory, where scholars looked at how the way in which individuals make use of their own rational choices. They look at individual rational choices basis. And then you have this structuralist theory, which was heavily influenced by Saussures linguistic theorization, and later Levi-Strauss brought in to anthropology. And you had a host of important theoreticians in sociology who argued very much against the existing theorizations, who argued that there are deeper grammar in every society, and then you whatever you see on the periphery are the reflections of this deeper structural conditions. And also keep it in mind that this structuralist theory is quite different from the structural functionalism. Okay, structuralist theory is quite different from the structural functionalism, and though both of them use structure, but they use structure in very, very different terms, different meaning. And then you have this post-structuralist theories and post-modern theories, and we know that it's again a group of theories or theorists, including Foucault and others, who only we say that they came after structuralism. They came after structuralism, and they claim to represent theories that are beyond the period of modern. But it's very difficult to name them because there is no given singular orientation. It's very difficult to put all of them together because they are so diverse. They're so diverse, and they only claim that these are the theories that came after the phase of structuralism. And again, that is not a settled issue. That's not a settled debate between sociologists, because there are a lot of scholars who argue that this argument about postmodernism is too far-fetched. What we are seeing is an extended, is a radicalized form of modernity. People like Anthony Giddens or Ulrich Beck, they talk about reflective modernity, they talk about late modernity. So they're not really happy with this whole celebration of postmodernity, especially in cultural studies and then and other things. Then you have post-colonial theories about the or theories that emerge from countries that experience coloniality, and who wanted to come out of it, and following that decolonial theories which try to develop new conceptual frameworks, new theoretical frameworks, new sensibilities that are devoid of this Eurocentric, social sciences. And but all these attempts are quite fraught with a lot of problems, because different cultural groups try to claim that what they represent is the true, authentic decolonial or anti-colonial epistemological positions. But so in spite of, or irrespective of all these diverse claims, the point that I want to drive home is that the scenario of sociological theory is a very, very fascinating field. It's an extremely fascinating field. You see the complexity of arguments, you see the philosophical background of new theories, you see the political leanings of different theoretical orientation, and once you are sensitive to these questions, what is the purpose of theorization? Okay, what kind of a political possibilities that such theorizations open up, and what are the pitfalls of that? Okay, and once you are sensitive to that, then understanding social theory and then appreciating its diversity, its complexity, its contradiction becomes very, very fascinating enterprise. So let me conclude here, and in tomorrow's class, that is the class just before the last class, we will have a discussion about the relation between theory and methodology and methods, because there's a very close connection between the theory, methodology and method. And many times we don't really realize that, but it is extremely important that you understand the connection between the ontology, the epistemology, the methodology and the method. Okay, we will discuss that tomorrow. Thank you.